Congratulations. Oh, thank you very much. Outstanding result. I am so proud. Oh, thank you.
Kerryn Phelps's victory in Wentworth was historic. It was the biggest swing against the Liberal Party in its history in a seat.
Thank you.
And it took away Scott Morrison's working majority. So this was a devastating blow for the government.
Hi, Jackie. Hello, Julia Banks. Lovely to meet you.
It's a time of really massive change, and Kerryn is right in the centre of all of that.
A little step this way.
I think there's a bit of myth-making about her victory. You're talking about less than 1,000 people changing their minds, and she would have failed.
And as we are in the seat of Wentworth, I congratulate Dr. Kerryn Phelps on her win. I look forward to working with you in Canberra.
Kerryn's not a grenade thrower. You know, she's not going to go in there and try and just disrupt things. She's a sensible person, but she's also not a wallflower.
We have zero tolerance for discrimination, zero tolerance for homophobia.
Over the years, Kerryn Phelps has had her fair share of critics, first up as head of the AMA, but more recently with her role on Sydney City Council. Anyone that goes into politics needs to develop a very thick hide.
I think the public will be expecting to see some results from Kerryn. There's been a lot of talk from her about what she wants to achieve.
Hey, look, this one's for Lisa.
Welcome to your office, because this is previously the ex-person that was here.
I actually came to visit the former member here when he was in this office. So
Good.
we came to talk about marriage equality a couple of times.
A lot of people go into politics, especially if they're from minor parties or independents, and say that they're going to do things differently, that they're going to change politics. In the end, politics is politics. They don't do anything different.
The people of Wentworth have put their trust in us, and what we need to do is to hit the ground running. Because I've taken on a number of big challenges in the past, and this is certainly one of the biggest. It certainly feels like a big challenge, but I think that everything I've ever done in my life before now has prepared me for the role. Would you like me to make some tea?
Yes, please. Maybe some coffee for you. Life in the Phelps-Stricker household is as it has always been, busy.
I've got all the briefing documents that I need.
Good.
And the travel advice.
Yep. We all go in 14 different directions, but we all come back together to talk about the day.
What are you going to make?
Chicken what would you like? Okay, chicken cutlet.
Yeah.
Jackie, Mama, she's very emotional, and she offers that incredible emotional support, not only for me, but for Ma too, the whole family. Kerryn, on the other hand, is very focused on big picture stuff.
Done.
I look after the house things. I look after all the finances, so that anything to do with running the house, my job.
And you can use them instead of plastic on the top of things.
And as she's often said when she's giving a talk, she has a wife. And a lot of women have come up to me saying, gee, I wish I had a wife. That's sort of how it plays. Can I just go through with what you're doing? We have to be at 9 o'clock at Bondi Wellington Street.
Okay.
Jackie, I think, is the driving force behind Kerryn. I think Kerryn's always had the desire, in political desire. Jackie's been the one behind her that said it's okay, you know, we can do this, we'll do this together, and has given Kerryn the confidence, I think, to go forward.
That one's early afternoon.
Yes.
Kerryn's kicked a lot of goals in her lifetime. One of the first high-profile people to go public about her sexuality.
And I've got the launch of the UNSW climate policy.
Correct.
When they went public 20 years ago, they were dragged through the dirt for a long time.
The next 3 weeks are huge.
I think that's going to be life from now on.
It certainly is. Bring it on, I say.
It was a very courageous and brave thing to do.
It's really important that they have a bit of fun.
Oh, yes. The lyrics to that song were just so funny. I can remember the first time I saw her eyes, and I just have a really vivid memory of that moment. One day we really realised and acknowledged that we'd actually fallen in love.
Garnets are the go, aren't they?
Oh, that looks really nice.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
My feelings for Kerryn are difficult to describe, as I'm sure anybody's are who find themselves very much in love with another human being. I think that she's somebody who I would have to say is my soulmate.
In the past, the conventional way of recovering after a heart attack was to live quietly without too much stress.
When I met Kerryn, I was told that she was a media doctor. I was like, oh, okay. I knew she was a doctor, but I had no idea that she had this major profile.
So it's tailor-made, and it actually begins within the first 24 hours that somebody is admitted to hospital, and something that people will continue for the long term.
OK, good to see you, Doc.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Kerryn.
Well, in 1997, when Kerryn and I were first together, the whole idea was that you didn't talk about your sexuality at all. Certainly teaching in a private girls' school, I was not out. As far as Kerryn was concerned, she was the same.
I married at 22 to the boyfriend that I'd been with since I was at school, and I had Jamie and Carl in the first few years after I got married. Realising that I was gay wasn't something that hit me like a bolt of lightning. It was something that was a growing awareness over a number of years.
It was while teaching aerobics on Sydney's lower North Shore that Kerryn Phelps first found herself attracted to another woman.
I think it was actually very difficult for my parents because on the one day I told them that my marriage was over and that I was pretty sure I was gay, and so they got a double whammy, and I think it came as an enormous shock to them.
We decided to go to New York to get married because we couldn't get married anywhere else.
I wanted to really make a statement to Jackie and to myself and to our family and friends that it was our intention to be together forever. We'd been out to lunch with some friends who told us that they'd been married in New York, and at the time we thought, what a wonderful romantic notion. New York is where I'd rather stay. I get allergic, smelly hay. Sure, I just at our penthouse view. Darling, I love you, but give me Park Avenue. Next step was to find a rabbi who would perform the ceremony for us.
The ancient blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam.
The only thing that worried him at the time was that Kerryn wasn't Jewish. So he had an undertaking from Kerryn that she would convert when we came back.
And as you share your life together...
She converted over 2 years, and she's probably more religious than me.
Beautiful. Congratulations, Mazel Tov.
We were planning to go public about our relationship when we found out that we were going to be discussed in one of the Sunday papers.
I remember the newspaper coming out and thinking, you know, this won't be pretty. I think it was front page of the paper. I rang Jackie, they were devastated. You know, reporters were all over them. But it was a difficult time. It was a very difficult time for them.
It's 23-7 now, Today FM.
Good morning, crew! Why don't we walk?
It was interesting for me to move into a house with 2 children, having come from many years of no child house. It's been a wonderful experience for me and hopefully for them.
Good morning, Mum. Hi, sweetheart. I need you to sign up for me, and can you... Having 2 mums is a bonus, really. No, I don't really see Jackie as a mum. I see her more like, you know, a best friend sort of thing. And Mum's sort of like the discipline side of thing.
OK, now, let's pack your lunch.
I see my dad a lot. I see Dad every weekend. We all get on really well. And Jackie and Dad get on really well too, so it's great.
See ya. No. I'll pull your feet harder tomorrow. When we did the Australian story, everybody was talking about it being a bit like the Brady Bunch. You know, happy little teenagers, happy couple, everybody happy.
Why should I get on the joy?
Behind the scenes, it was not as happy, but I didn't realise that at the time. It was like you threw a stone into a beautiful pond, and I don't think I understood what the ripples were going to turn into.
My parents tried to be supportive, but that support for Jackie's and my relationship tended to wane with time.
My family loved Kerryn from the get-go. The reaction of Kerryn's parents was very different to my parents. I didn't feel warm and fuzzy about being welcomed into the family particularly. There were consequences to the outing that affected relationships in the family. There was a rift, which was public at the time, between our oldest daughter Jamie and Kerryn.
I came third.
Oh, cool. What a lot of people don't tend to give enough credence to is the fact that children are people with their own individual personalities, and you're not always going to be compatible with your child. And that was a very difficult realisation for me to come to. Terribly painful.
Do you want to go to that party in DY?
Around the time that Jamie was leaving school, she was, to put it mildly, difficult, and she really needed to take some time to find herself.
I recall being a confused and painful teenager, I suppose. I was just a bit of a nightmare of a teenager. And I was, in myself, I think, a bit unhappy.
So she went off overseas and she worked overseas, and I didn't have contact with her for a while. You remember that one, that photo shoot?
I do remember this photo shoot. Is this the one where we said blowing away the stereotypes?
Yes.
We kept on doing publicity because it was so important to talk about it. People were behind closed doors and I wanted to throw the doors open. There it is. Glam, gay, and we won't go away. Well, we didn't go away.
There were some people who were absolutely supportive and terrific and on board and welcoming of what we had to say, but there were others who were excoriating. That was, what, 1998?
Yep.
There were opinion pieces written in newspapers about how Jackie had no right as a teacher to talk about being in a same-sex marriage.
I can remember reading this particular article and I looked at it and I read it and I thought, this woman has written the most scathing piece about me as a teacher. My work situation, I was told to stop talking about it. I wasn't expected to be told to shut up and not talk about my relationship because I didn't understand why people wouldn't be happy for me.
Jackie was a born teacher. She had quite a lot of support, but the negative impact from some quarters was fairly damning and consistent, and I think that wore her down in the end.
I decided at that time that I would leave teaching. I decided that I would be Kerryn's support in whatever area I needed to, particularly seeing she was taking on her first political role.
It was an historic vote.
Hi. It is an absolute pleasure. Historically, the first woman president of the AMA.
When Kerryn won the AMA presidency, we as a family were incredibly proud of her.
And the really good part was she'd been outed and no one cared.
This was a decisive vote today, and it was a very clear mandate from the AMA National Conference that they want a somewhat new emphasis.
The presidency of the AMA was intense, and it was certainly highly political.
The majority of medical opinion is not with Dr. Phelps, whose only qualification is in the media, not in any sort of specialist medical area.
The relationship with the Health Minister was appalling, but I learnt about how the political process works. You learn how the political process can create solutions to problems.
We put health back on the national agenda, making it the #1 domestic policy issue. Thank you.
By the time I finished with the AMA, I hadn't seen Jamie for a couple of years, and it was always a source of great distress for me, and Jackie, being Jackie, said, right, enough of this.
When my mother died in 2003, because family was so important to me, I didn't want that to happen again. I didn't want Jamie to lose her mother. I didn't want Kerryn to lose her daughter.
So I recall getting a letter from Jackie, and that was a bit of a shock because I hadn't spoken to either of them for about 6 years. And she explained in the letter that her mother had passed away, and she didn't want an opportunity for us to all be close and be a family again to pass without sort of trying to see if we could all, you know, get back in contact and have a nice relationship again.
I saw Jamie's face at the door and I was just overwhelmed with relief and with emotion, and we talked for hours.
Within seconds of them seeing each other, they were in each other's arms. Lots of talking. The rift was healed over, and that was many years ago now. And I think the relationship that they have is even stronger because of it.
Something I've never made before. Oh, what have you made? It looks amazing. Well, I've got to put it in the oven, the lamb back straps. Oh, wow, okay.
Family is incredibly important to both Jackie and to me. We get together as often as we can.
Very few people get to see the softer side of Kerryn. I don't think she allows that to come out in public. She really does have a very soft nature, but she doesn't let many people in.
Some years ago, Jackie and I had discussed having a child, and Jackie in particular wanted to have a child and she couldn't for medical reasons. And so I agreed to do IVF, and unfortunately it wasn't successful.
Kissing Nonna? Mwah. Kissing Diddy? Mwah. Kissing Billy? Mwah. A few years later, though, I got my wish in a very convoluted way. I had to trust the universe, and it delivered.
I had an approach that there was a child in our local area who I knew who was being removed from a family by docs, and would Jackie and I be prepared to do crisis care?
I was 9 years old when I came to live with Jackie and Kerryn. I was at school one afternoon, and a representative from the Department of Community Services, docs, came and they said, "Gabby, can we please speak to you?" It was quite a traumatic day. I was crying and screaming because I knew that I was not going to go back to the house that I had known before. I was going to complete strangers practically.
When Gabby arrived, she arrived in her school uniform with absolutely nothing else. No toothbrush, no nothing, absolutely nothing. She was not in a good state. She had malnutrition. She had all sorts of issues that needed health attention pretty quickly. Kerryn said to her, "Tell me what you need." And Gabby looked up with her big brown eyes and she said, "I really need access to a computer and homework."
When Gabby came to us and I realised that she hadn't read a book, I started out by reading to her. And so every night I started to get her to read to me. She increased her academic performance over time. When it came to the end of sixth class, we were just so shocked and delighted because she was announced as Dux of the school. It was such an incredible achievement.
Go for a swim.
Gabby's original placement was a crisis placement just for a few months, but it became clear in that time that it needed to be permanent. But because we didn't have marriage equality, we couldn't adopt as a couple. And so we then had to set about working alongside other groups to achieve adoption reform in New South Wales.
There was lots of red tape. There was a new caseworker essentially every week, and I would tell them the same thing. I'm happy, I want to stay here, I love Jackie and Kerryn, I want them to be my parents, I want to be adopted. Eventually the courts did listen, and we were able to get my adoption passed through the courts.
So Jackie and Kerryn were the first same-sex non-kin couple to adopt a child in New South Wales, which is a major advancement going forward for kids, really, for kids that are in foster homes.
At the time that we adopted Gabby, the marriage equality cause was really heating up, and Kerryn was out there making the case wherever she could.
The issue is that marriage is about children. It's about enshrining in our legislation that marriage is between a man and a woman because of children, because motherhood and fatherhood are important.
Rubbish. Well, some of the encounters were incredibly brutal. I mean,
in particular the Australian Christian lobby, were putting up arguments that were frankly offensive. And I had to try and maintain my composure.
You're telling me two people in their 70s have an intention to have children? Absolute nonsense. You're not speaking rational sense.
That is nonsense.
I think Jackie and Kerryn, being public, have acted as role models. And in fact, many of the people who I know who were gay but hadn't come out yet would often make contact with Jackie and Kerryn, come to their house, talk about it. Even my kids' friends. In fact, one, I probably would even say, prevented him from committing suicide.
Hi everyone, I'm here tonight with my beautiful friends Jackie and Kerryn.
Well, Kerryn and Jackie absolutely helped me. I mean, when I was younger, I really, I have made no secret of the fact that I felt suicidal. Without Kerryn and Jackie, I might not be here in quite the same way. They really were very much a part of the way I came out. And I came out in order to give my support to marriage equality. I was like, I have to back this. I have to back this. And the best way to do it is going to say, well, guess what? I am one, whatever one is.
We can rely on the Australian people to do the bloody right thing.
We had a sense that the tide was turning. Gabby went to Ascom for high school. Even though it was the school that I had taught at and the school that I had left, I wanted her to go there. I was uplifted when the school invited Kerryn and I to talk about marriage equality. And, for me, having left at a time when you couldn't talk about your sexuality or your relationship, to be invited back to talk to the school about that subject was a closing of circles for me.
I remember sitting in the audience and thinking, wow, this is huge, especially because of the significance of Mum coming back. I felt overwhelming support from the student body, and that was really positive because it showed that young people in Australia were really behind marriage equality.
What a day. What a day for love, for equality, for respect. Australia has done it.
When marriage equality became law in Australia last year, we decided on our 20th wedding anniversary from 1998 that we would renew our vows in our synagogue with our family present because they had never been present before.
And it felt to us that the job was done. It felt to us that we could actually sit back and that we had achieved what we wanted to achieve politically and that we could just get on with the rest of our lives.
And then Malcolm was removed as Prime Minister, and the rest is history.
It was extraordinary. It was described as madness by many, and I think it's difficult to describe it in any other way. In the party room meeting today...
When I heard that Malcolm Turnbull had been toppled, I was angry. I thought, this is just ridiculous. I couldn't see a reason for it. I thought that it was political self-interest, and I thought that it was something that I had to make a statement about.
The day that Mum announced, I remember she had our sort of closest friends and family. There must have been maybe 30 of us. And we were all wearing purple and we sort of marched through the streets of Double Bay to the press conference.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Kerryn Phelps, and I'm here to announce that I've decided to run for the by-election in Wentworth.
I just remember thinking, wow, this is incredible, and she's got so much support behind her. And then her Purple Army, with all her volunteers, just grew and grew and grew.
This is going to be a grassroots campaign. This is not a billionaires club.
At the start of the campaign, you could have made a lot of money through the betting agencies by putting money on Kerryn Phelps, but everything came crashing down for the government. The Liberals were very concerned, counting down to polling day, that they were going to lose.
It's going to be very close, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be very close, yeah.
She's against absolutely everything. I mean, she's really terrifying.
Hopefully the voters of Wentworth aren't stupid
I suspect that many have already seen through Dr. Phelps.
The government decided to target Kerryn Phelps very personally. I think it backfired.
There's a mood for change, certainly over the last 2 weeks, as people have become really engaged. And let's be honest, the government hasn't had a great fortnight and people have had to think about it.
Kerryn Phelps.
Thank you. Hello.
How are you?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
In the last week of the campaign, I really sensed a shift in sentiment from the people coming to the pre-polling booths.
I really think it's a matter of medical urgency to get the children off Nauru.
I've been voting for 65 years, and I've always voted Labour. Today, I'm going to give you my vote.
Good luck with it. Thank you very much. All the best.
If I could vote, I would vote for you.
Thank you. Bye. It's gorgeous.
Moments ago, polls closed and vote counting is getting underway.
During the vote counting on election night, we were at home.
29 out of 30. So virtually all the Labor Party's preferences are going to her.
Well, at 7:20, we were watching the television and Anthony Green called the election result.
Got 1/5 of the polling places, and they were all showing the same thing, a swing of more than 20% against the Liberal Party. So I think we can declare Kerryn Phelps as the winner of the Wentworth by-election.
We, screamed and jumped up in the air and raced around getting ready, and then got in the cars and went down to North Bondi, where everybody was just elated.
When we walked into the campaign party, I was very aware that it was a historical moment.
And I know this isn't a victory for one person. This is a victory for a community of people who wanted to see politics done differently.
As soon as the result became clear on the night, everyone wanted a piece of Kerryn.
But we started this morning at 6:30 and we've been to the Sunrise program, to Today's Show. We've been back to do Sky News and then over to do Insiders.
Kerryn Phelps, good morning. Congratulations.
Thank you, Barry.
And thank you for joining us after such a big night.
We were watching Insiders. Kerryn obviously was in the booth, but she was talking about kids off Nauru, was talking about the New Zealand solution.
The resettlement options should be explored, and New Zealand is an extremely good option.
And within an hour, Tony Burke was on, Labor was shifting its position.
The most important thing here is that we, same as Kerryn Phelps said, that we listen to the medical advice with respect to children.
Yes.
The realisation was that Kerryn would be a significant player in this parliament.
Yes.
Bill Shorten and Shane
That's
Newman
movement
released
from Labor.
an announcement about a private members bill during the week, which is...
Getting kids off Nauru issue is a classic case where you're really looking to claim credit for 3 or 4 years of difficult policy implementation. So I think a lot of that stuff is overstated.
Kerryn Phelps has only got a few months to try to get some runs on the board. The next election is going to be Kerryn Phelps' toughest election.
People are saying they want politics done differently. And if the major parties won't do that, independents have already shown that they will happily fill that space.
I think the greatest challenge in getting re-elected is making herself relevant to the people of Wentworth, and that's not easy when you're an independent, and especially if she chases niche issues like banning live exports, or even if it's getting children off Nauru.
The people of Wentworth seemed largely unconcerned about the prospect of the crossbench having the so-called balance of power. I prefer to think of it as the power of balance.
I expect the next few months will be intense. I think there'll be a lot to get my head around. One of my policy platforms is lifelong learning, so I'm putting that into practice again.
Kerryn Phelps will probably never have as much power as she'll have in the next few months in this parliament with the coalition government in minority. It's going to be really interesting to see how she chooses to wield that power.
A vision for the future we will be leaving for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you.
To use a medical expression, I think success in politics is a retrospective diagnosis. You probably only know looking back whether you've been successful or not.